The stasis pod hissed open, cold mist pouring out as Greg Roberts took his first agonizing breath in 800,000 years, his withered body flooding with sensation as an impossible amount of time rewound itself in an instant, shock and confusion overwhelming his mind as he struggled to remember where he was or why. "Commander Roberts, welcome back. I apologize for the disorientation, but there's no time to waste." A synthesized voice crackled from the pod's speakers, achingly familiar. Ares, the UES Vengeance's AI. Greg's eyes widened as the centuries of stasis-induced amnesia melted away, replaced by a deluge of horrific memories. The surprise, pack-led attack on Earth, billions slaughtered as the alien warships bombarded humanity's homeworld from orbit without warning or mercy. The remnants of the human race fleeing in sleeper ships to the stars, doomed to drift forever in the endless void. No, not doomed, Greg reminded himself as he struggled to sit up, his rejuvenated muscles still stiff. The UES Vengeance was no mere ark of survivors, but an instrument of apocalyptic retribution, a final weapon entrusted to him and his crew. They were to sleep, to endure as Ares improved their ship with stolen alien technology, until it could annihilate the mightiest pack-led fleets single-handedly. 800 millennia later, that day had finally come. Humanity would be avenged. The pack-led would be scoured from the universe, made to pay for their sins in blood. It was time to remind the galaxy that though forgotten, humankind was very much alive. And that they were angry. "Ares," Greg said, voice gravelly from centuries of disuse, "set course for the pack-led homeworld. We're going to send those scaly bastards a message they won't soon forget." "Commander, sensors have detected multiple pack-led warships on an intercept course," Ares reported, its synthesized voice calm despite the impending confrontation. Greg's grin widened, a savage gleam in his eyes. Finally, a chance to spill some pack-led blood. "Ours. Ready the particle beam cannons and load the fusion torpedoes. Let's show these bastards what human vengeance looks like." The pack-led ships, a motley assortment of cruisers and destroyers, quickly closed in on the Vengeance, weapons bristling. They had never encountered a ship of such immense size and obvious technological superiority, but they attacked nonetheless, assuming it to be some upstart race's futile attempt at rebellion against pack-led dominion. Plasma bolts and antimatter missiles streaked towards the Vengeance, the void of space lit up by their destructive energies. But the human ship's advanced energy shields flared to life, harmlessly absorbing the impacts, leaving the hull unmarred. Greg sneered contemptuously at the ineffectual display. "Ares, return fire. Let's carve these scaly freaks into pieces." The Vengeance's particle beam cannons thrummed with power, lancing out towards the pack-led fleet. The beams sliced through the enemy ship's hulls effortlessly, metal and composite parting like butter. Gouts of flame erupted from the grievous wounds as atmosphere ignited, debris and pack-led bodies spilling into the void. The crippled ships barely had time to register the catastrophic damage before the Vengeance's fusion torpedoes slammed into them. The immense heat and pressure crushed reactor cores, setting off chain reactions that blasted the pack-led warships apart, reducing them to rapidly expanding clouds of molten metal. In a matter of minutes, the once mighty pack-led warfleet had been reduced to shattered, burning husks. The Vengeance sailed through the wreckage, its shields shrugging off the occasional collision with drifting debris. "Commander, I'm detecting a surge of activity on pack-led communication frequencies," Ares said. "It appears news of the destruction of their ships by an unknown attacker is spreading rapidly. There is significant confusion and alarm." Greg leaned back in his chair, a cold smile on his face, satisfaction welling up inside him. The pack-led were finally getting a taste of the fear and helplessness they had inflicted upon humanity so long ago. "Set course for the next pack-led fleet, Ares," Greg ordered, his voice hard. "We'll shatter every last one of their ships between us and their homeworld. They'll learn the price of genocide soon enough." Fleet after pack-led fleet fell before the Vengeance's fury as it tore its way through enemy territory, drawing ever closer to the heart of the pack-led supremacy, their homeworld. The once verdant world had long ago been transformed into an ecumenopolis. its surface covered by sprawling cities that reached towards the sky with gleaming towers. "Activate the cloaking device," Greg commanded. "Let's gut these bastards before they even know we're here." Gers complied, rendering the Vengeance invisible to Pakled sensors. The ship slipped past the orbital defense platforms like a ghost, descending into the planet's atmosphere undetected. Greg's eyes were fixed on the viewscreen, his gaze locked on the Emperor's palace as it came into view, an immense structure that dwarfed the buildings around it. Proximity alarms blared, jerking Greg out of his vengeful reverie. "Report!" he barked. "Sensors have detected a large number of fast-moving objects rising from concealed launchers near the palace," Ares replied. "Analysis indicates they are Pakled combat drones." The viewscreen filled with a swarm of sleek, deadly-looking machines, their hulls bristling with weapons. They moved with unsettling speed and coordination, hurtling towards the Vengeance like a cloud of angry wasps. "They're attempting to overwhelm our cloaking field with the sheer volume of electromagnetic emissions from their sensors," Ares said. "I'm diverting power to the shields, but we won't be able to maintain cloak." The Vengeance rippled into visibility as the drones opened fire, space around the ship filling with searing beams of energy. The human ship's shields flared, a coruscating bubble of force straining against the onslaught. Greg's mind raced, years of tactical training and experience kicking into high gear. His eyes fell on the weapons console, widening as an idea took shape. "Ares, magnetize the hull plating and prepare to detonate our complement of cobalt warheads." "Commander, at this range the EMP from the detonations will disable our systems as well," the AI cautioned. "We'll worry about that later. Right now we need breathing room. Do it!" The Vengeance shuddered as its hull electrified, the metal plates becoming a single cohesive unit. A moment later, space around the ship lit up with the blinding white flare of multiple fusion detonations. The magnetized hull contained and redirected the blasts, transforming the Vengeance into a giant fragmentation bomb. Thousands of molten razor-sharp hull shards exploded outwards in every direction, ripping through the drone swarm like buckshot. Pakled machines shattered and spun away, trailing sparks and leaking fluids. Shrapnel slashed through hulls and detonated power cores, turning the coordinated attack into a chaotic mess of tumbling wreckage. As the detonations faded, the Vengeance dropped like a stone, all systems offline. It plummeted through the ravaged drone swarm, trailing smoke and fire. "Rerouting power from secondary fusion cores," Ares reported, its voice distorted by static. "Restoring essential systems, now." The Vengeance's engines roared back to life mere meters from the palace's roof. Stone cracked and shattered beneath the ship's immense bulk as it came to rest, its weapons already swiveling to target any further threats. Greg rose from his chair, adrenaline singing in his veins. He strode towards the armory with purposeful steps, the servos of his powered armor whirring. The suit enclosed him like a second skin as he stepped into it, the helmet clanking shut over his face. He snatched up a plasma rifle, checking its charge with a practiced eye. "Ares, keep the engines hot," he said over the suit's comms. "I want to be able to dust off the microsecond I'm back aboard." "Acknowledged, Commander. Good hunting." Greg strode down the embarkation ramp and out onto the cracked, rubble-strewn roof of the palace. In the distance, the skyline of the capital burned, the Vengeance's arrival throwing the city into chaos. Alarms wailed, and Pakled soldiers boiled out of the palace's interior like ants from a kicked hive, but Greg paid them no mind. He had an emperor to dethrone, and no force in this universe or any other would stop him from claiming his revenge. Greg's plasma rifle roared, blasting smoking holes in the massive, ornate doors barring his path into the palace. The reinforced metal buckled and warped under the relentless onslaught, finally giving way with a tortured shriek. Alarms wailed as Greg charged through the ruined entrance, his armored boots crunching on shards of shattered stone and twisted metal. Pakled soldiers boiled out of side passages and hidden alcoves, their weapons spitting fire. Bolts of searing plasma and hypersonic flechettes filled the air, but Greg didn't slow. His rifle barked again and again, dropping the aliens with precise headshots that burned fist-sized holes through their helmets. He stormed down the long vaulted halls, following the glowing map Ares had downloaded to his HUD. Priceless tapestries and paintings burned as stray shots struck them. Ancient history turned to ash in the blink of an eye. Rounding a corner, Greg skidded to a halt. A hulking figure stood in his path, clad in ornate power armor of crimson and gold. Fenris, the Emperor's personal bodyguard, and the deadliest warrior of the Pakled supremacy. He charged, crossing the distance between them in the blink of an eye, moving with speed that belied his massive bulk. Greg brought his rifle up, but Fenris was already inside his guard, a humming power blade clutched in his gauntleted fist. The blade hissed as it sliced through the air, Greg barely managing to sidestep the blow. He felt the heat of its passage against his shoulder as he slammed his fist into the side of Fenris's helmet with all his augmented might. The alien's head snapped to the side, his helmet cracking under the impact. But Fenris was far from finished. Shaking off the blow like a bull shrugging off a fly, he roared and surged forward, smashing his helmet into Greg's chest. The impact lifted Greg off his feet, sending him flying backwards to crash into a towering marble pillar. Stone shattered under the force of the impact, Greg's HUD flickering with damage reports. He shook his head to clear it, his vision swimming. Fenris loomed over him, power blade raised high for a killing blow, a triumphant snarl on his split lips. Desperately, Greg triggered his armor's emergency gravity manipulators. Fenris suddenly staggered as his own mass increased 100-fold, his joints and servos screeching in protest as they strained to support his weight. Greg rolled to his feet, snatched up his dropped rifle, and fired point-blank into Fenris's chest. The plasma bolt punched clean through the alien's armor like it was made of paper, flash-boiling flesh and bone. Fenris collapsed like a fallen tree, a molten, smoking ruin where his chest had been. Greg didn't pause to catch his breath. He sprinted onwards, rapidly closing on the massive doors of the throne room. A micro-missile leapt from his armor's shoulder launcher, slamming into the doors and blasting them off their hinges in a storm of fire and shrapnel. He charged into the throne room, rifle leveled at the cowering figure on the throne. The Emperor squealed in terror, his many chins wobbling, jeweled fingers scrabbling at a device on his wrist. Greg fired, but a millisecond too late. The Emperor vanished in a flare of light, his teleporter whisking him to safety a mere heartbeat before the plasma bolt would have vaporized his skull. "Damn it!" Greg snarled, lowering his rifle. The throne room was empty, the Emperor's gaudy treasures scattered across the floor, abandoned in his haste to flee. He touched a hand to his helmet, opening a channel to the Vengeance. Ares, the Emperor escaped. He's probably going to try to rally his forces. We need to move fast. "Acknowledged," Ares replied. "I'm detecting increased comm chatter and troop movements across the planet. It seems the Pakled are mobilizing for a counterattack." "Let them come," Greg growled, turning to stride out of the throne room, his armored boots crunching on shattered glass and rubble. "We'll burn this whole damn planet to ash if we have to. The Emperor can't hide forever." Greg stormed out of the ruined palace, his mind already racing ahead. He opened a comm channel to the Vengeance as he strode across the rubble-strewn roof, barking orders. "Ares, I need immediate extraction. Track the Emperor's teleport signal and give me a location now." The AI's response crackled in his helmet a heartbeat later. "Acknowledged, Commander. Triangulating signal origin, target locked. The Emperor's teleport signature leads to a facility located 2.4 kilometers beneath the planet's surface, directly below the palace." Greg reached the waiting Vengeance and strode up the embarkation ramp. "A secret bunker, huh? Scan it. I want to know what the hell he's got down there." "Scanning now," Ares replied as Greg settled into the command chair, his eyes locked on the view screen. "Detecting multiple large power signatures consistent with pre-launch procedures for a fleet of spacecraft. It appears the Emperor is attempting to flee the planet and rally the Supremacy's remaining forces." Greg's jaw tightened, a growl building in his throat. Like hell was he going to let that scaly bastard slip away now. "Heirs, arm the bunker buster nukes. We're going to bury that son of a bitch." The ship shuddered as the missile bay doors opened, the massive warheads sliding into launch tubes. "Missiles armed and ready, Commander, awaiting your order." "Fire." The Vengeance bucked as the missiles leapt away, their engines flaring white-hot in the night sky. They arced downwards, striking the ground and burrowing deep, their reinforced casings allowing them to punch through layer after layer of earth and stone. For a moment, all was silent. Then the world turned white as the warheads detonated, their fusion hearts unleashing the power of miniature suns. The ground heaved and bucked like a wild thing, massive fissures splitting the earth as millions of tons of rock and soil were instantly vaporized. The shockwaves raced outwards, toppling skyscrapers and sending mountainous clouds of debris soaring into the sky. When the tremors finally ceased, and the dust began to settle, all that remained of the Emperor's secret base was a colossal crater, its depths filled with the shattered molten remains of his escape fleet. Ari's voice filled the stunned silence on the bridge. "Seismic scans complete. No life signs detected." A savage, predatory grin split Greg's face. The Emperor was dead, the Pakled homeworld's defenses in ruins. It was time to end this. "Thyres, open a planet-wide broadcast. I want to be seen on every screen and holoprojector on this miserable rock." The AI complied, and moments later Greg's armored visage appeared on every still-functioning display across the planet. He stared into the pickup, his eyes hard. "People of the Pakled Supremacy, I am Commander Greg Roberts of the United Earthship Vengeance. I come to you as a representative of the human race, the same race your kind tried to exterminate so long ago. Your Emperor is dead, his body buried beneath the ruins of his own escape tunnel. Your fleets are shattered, your defenses in ruins, but despite all your species has done, I offer you a choice." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a growl. "Surrender unconditionally and be spared, or continue to resist and be annihilated. The choice is yours." To punctuate his ultimatum, Greg nodded to Ares. A moment later, a brilliant lance of light stabbed down from the heavens, the Vengeance's particle beam striking an uninhabited sector of the capital. In an instant, a dozen city blocks vanished, reduced to their component atoms by the unimaginable heat and energy of the beam. Across the planet, the Pakled watched in horror, the true scope of human vengeance finally settling into their collective consciousness. This was no longer a war, it was an extermination, and they were the prey. Within minutes, frantic messages began flooding the Vengeance's comm channels, local governors and administrators begging for mercy, offering unconditional surrender. Finally, a haggard-looking Pakled in ornate robes appeared on the screen, identifying himself as the planetary governor. "Commander Roberts," he said, his voice shaking, "on behalf of the Pakled people, I hereby offer our formal and unconditional surrender. We beg of you, show mercy. We will submit to any terms you demand." Greg regarded the screen coldly. "Prepare a shuttle and come aboard the Vengeance. We will discuss the terms of your surrender in person." Hours later, the planetary governor stood before Greg on the Vengeance's bridge. His shoulders slumped in defeat as he signed the formal articles of surrender. Greg watched impassively, his mind already turning to the future. As the governor turned to leave, Greg called after him, "Remember this moment, Governor. Remember that the human race has returned, and we will not rest until every Pakled world has either submitted or been reduced to ashes. This is only the beginning." Greg stood on the Vengeance's bridge, his gaze fixed on the holographic display floating before him. The Pakled homeworld hung in the center, a defeated colossus brought low by human fury. But it was only the beginning. "Hers," Greg barked. "Access the Pakled's records. I want a list of every damn world they control." The AI set to work, its quantum processors sifting through the vast data troves captured from the Pakled's shattered networks. Moments later, a staggering catalogue of systems unfurled across the display. "Analysis complete," Ares reported. "The Pakled supremacy encompasses 1,247 star systems, each with an average population of 6.8 billion Pakled and subjugated races. Greg's eyes widened at the sheer scale of it. Even with the Vengeance's godlike power, conquering an empire of this size would be the work of lifetimes. He needed a faster way, a message that would shatter the Supremacy's hold on the galaxy. "Give me their dozen most heavily defended worlds," Greg ordered. The display shifted, isolating a cluster of systems, each one bristling with the icons of fortresses and fleet anchorages. "Set a course," Greg said, a cold smile on his face. "It's time we introduced ourselves to the neighbors." The Vengeance leapt to warp, crossing the gulf between stars in heartbeats. At each system, the cycle repeated itself with brutal efficiency. The mighty warship would appear without warning, slicing through perimeter defenses like a ghost. Greg would broadcast his ultimatum on all frequencies, his voice cold and implacable. "Surrender or be destroyed. You have 1 hour to comply." Most of the planets, their wills broken by the news of the homeworld's fall, capitulated immediately, their leaders tripping over themselves to grovel before the emissary of their new human overlords. But a few, led by fanatic warlords who refused to bow to any master, spat defiance at Greg's demands. They screamed their fury and fired on the Vengeance with everything they had, hurling fleets and orbital bastions at the lone human ship. Greg almost pitied them. Almost. "Ares," he said quietly, "burn them." The Vengeance spoke its retort in the language of nuclear fire. Antimatter bombs, fusion rockets and kinetic kill projectiles rained down on the rebellious worlds, each one a searing lance of annihilation. Cities vaporized in eye-searing flashes, reduced to drifting clouds of ash and molten glass. Continents cracked and burned as the bombardment ignited atmosphere-consuming firestorms that raged across entire hemispheres. Oceans flash-boiled, sending scalding tsunamis to scour the lands of all trace of civilization. When it was over, nothing remained of the defiant worlds but shattered continents and debris-choked orbits. There would be no survivors, no one left to spread whispers of resistance. Only a message, writ in the blood of billions: defy humanity at your peril. Across the Supremacy, Pakled worlds fell over each other to surrender, as news of the Vengeance's unstoppable campaign spread like a cancer. Planetary governors, sector administrators, and system lords, once so smug in their invincibility, prostrated themselves before Greg's visage, pleading for mercy, desperate not to be the next to taste the human's wrath. In a span of weeks that passed like a fevered dream, the Pakled Supremacy, an empire that had endured for 100,000 years, was brought to its knees by a single human ship and a man with an unquenchable thirst for vengeance. But as Greg stood on the bridge watching the last Pakled world submit to human rule, he felt no satisfaction, no sense of a job well done, only a cold, unrelenting anger. The Pakled were just the beginning, the first name on a long list of races that had wronged humanity, that had dared to raise their hand against Earth in its darkest hour. And he would not rest until every last one of them had paid the price. As the Vengeance sailed through the void between stars, its sensors constantly probing the darkness for any sign of threat or opportunity, Arius's voice suddenly crackled over the bridge speakers. "Commander, I'm detecting a distress signal originating from a nearby system. It appears to be a refugee fleet under attack by Pakled forces." Greg leaned forward in his command chair, eyes narrowing. "Pakled? I thought we'd dealt with the last of their holdouts." "It seems a remnant fleet has refused to surrender and is now preying on civilian vessels. Scans indicate the refugee ships are in critical condition, their hulls breached and venting atmosphere." A cold smile tugged at Greg's lips. "Set a course, Ares. It's time we reminded the galaxy what happens to those who defy humanity's will." The Vengeance tore through the void, its immense warp drive devouring the light years in heartbeats. It emerged from warp on the outskirts of the system, its sensors immediately painting a grim picture. A motley assortment of ships, ranging from battered freighters to overcrowded passenger liners, limped through space, trails of debris and frozen atmosphere marking the paths of Pakled weapons fire. The attackers, a dozen cruisers and destroyers, circled the refugee fleet like wolves harrying wounded prey. But the wolves were about to learn what it meant to be prey themselves. "This is Commander Greg Roberts of the UES Vengeance to Pakled Forces," Greg broadcast on all frequencies, his voice cold and hard as iron. "Break off your attack immediately, or be destroyed." Their answer came in the form of a storm of point defense laser fire from the Vengeance. Beams of concentrated light staked through the void, slicing into Pakled hulls with surgical precision. Armor boiled away, hull plates shattered, and atmosphere ignited, as the lasers bored deep into the enemy ship's vitals. The Pakled returned fire, plasma bolts and missiles streaking toward the human ship. But the Vengeance's shields flared to life, a coruscating bubble of force that shrugged off the impacts with contemptuous ease. Greg let the one-sided battle play out for a few moments more, letting the refugees witness the power that had come to their aid. Then, with a word, he unleashed the full might of the Vengeance. Fusion beams lanced out, spearing Pakled ships like fish in a barrel. Antimatter warheads burrowed into ruptured hulls before detonating, converting matter to energy in blinding flashes of radiation. In a matter of minutes, the once proud Pakled ships were reduced to expanding clouds of debris, their crews atomized or flash-frozen in the pitiless vacuum. As the echoes of the battle faded, Greg hailed the refugee fleet. "This is the Vengeance your attackers have been dealt with. Prepare to receive boarding parties to assist with repairs and medical aid." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then a babble of relieved and grateful voices filled the comm channels. The refugees, hailing from a dozen different species, had lived in fear of the Pakled for generations, their worlds and peoples oppressed and exploited. To them, this mysterious savior, appearing from nowhere to strike down their tormentors with godlike ease, seemed like something out of myth. Tyree's avatar materialized on the bridge beside Greg. "Commander, refugee representatives are requesting permission to come aboard and meet with you." Greg nodded. "Granted, let's show them some human hospitality." As repair drones and medical teams fanned out among the refugee ships, stabilizing damaged systems and triaging the wounded, Greg welcomed a delegation of refugees aboard the Vengeance. He watched their eyes widen as they took in the immense scale of the human ship, the advanced technology integrated seamlessly into every surface and system. "I am Zoran, elected speaker for the refugees," a tall insectoid being chittered, its multifaceted eyes reflecting Greg's image 100-fold. "On behalf of us all, I extend our deepest gratitude for your timely intervention. But I must ask, who are you? What nation or power do you represent? We have never seen a ship like yours or weapons of such terrible might." Greg let out a short, hard laugh. "I represent a people that most of the galaxy has forgotten, a people that were driven to the brink of extinction by the Pakled and races like them, a people that have returned to visit vengeance upon their would-be destroyers." He stepped forward, his powered armor whirring softly. "I am the last soldier of the United Earth, and the Vengeance is the instrument of humanity's wrath. We will not rest until the Pakled and all who emulate their cruelty have been brought to justice." The refugees exchanged glances, a mix of awe and trepidation on their varied faces. The humans were a legend, a cautionary tale used to frighten children, a once mighty race that had dared to stand against the Pakled and been annihilated for their defiance, their homeworld scoured of life. But now, impossibly, one of them stood before them, the sole herald of a dead race that refused to stay buried. Word of the Vengeance and its indomitable human commander spread like wildfire through the refugee fleet. The humans had returned, and they had come to shatter the chains of Pakled oppression. As the last of the repairs were completed and the refugees prepared to depart, Greg addressed them one final time. "I offer you a choice," he said, his voice carried to every ship by the Vengeance's powerful comma rays. "Return to your homes, to your old lives, and hope that the Vengeance can keep the wolves at bay, or—" He paused, letting the word hang in the air. "Join me. Join humanity's crusade to bring justice to a galaxy that has long forgotten the meaning of the word. I cannot promise you safety or comfort or even survival, but I can promise you a chance to fight back against those who have wronged you, to reclaim your destiny from those who would deny it to you. For a long moment there was silence. Then, one by one, the refugee ships signaled their response. They would join the vengeance. They would fight. Greg felt a strange sensation stirring in his chest as he watched the refugee fleet form up around the vengeance, a motley assortment of vessels united by a common purpose. He had set out to avenge humanity, to make the Pakled pay for their crimes against his people. But now he realized his mission had become something more. He was fighting for all the oppressed, all the downtrodden, all those who had been ground beneath the boot of Pakled tyranny. He was fighting to bring hope to a galaxy that had long since given up on it. And with an army of the righteous at his back, he would not rest until that hope had been rekindled in every corner of the universe. The vengeance tore through hyperspace, the refugee fleet strung out behind it like the tail of a comet. Greg stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of their target, a key Pakled military installation, a linchpin in their network of supply depots. "Exiting hyperspace in 3, 2, 1, mark," Ares intoned. The stars snapped back into focus as the fleet decelerated, the massive shape of the Pakled base looming before them. Proximity alarms wailed as the base's defenses came online, a bristling array of plasma cannons and missile batteries swiveling to track the intruders. The refugee fleet surged forward, their weapons blazing. Plasma bolts and fusion missiles streaked towards the base, impacting against its shields in blossoms of fire. The Vengeance joined the fray a heartbeat later, its particle beams lancing out, skewering gun emplacements and sensor arrays with pinpoint precision. Under the onslaught, the base's shields flickered and died. Seizing the opening, Greg barked an order. "Ares, fire the resonance torpedoes!" A salvo of sleek projectiles leapt from the Vengeance's launch tubes, streaking towards the base's reactor complex. They struck home, burrowing deep into the reinforced structure before detonating, their warheads tuned to the exact frequency of the reactor's containment field. The results were cataclysmic. The containment field shattered, the reactor's fusion core rupturing in a sun-bright explosion that tore the base apart from within. Secondary detonations rippled through its structure as power conduits overloaded and munitions cooked off. In a matter of minutes, the once formidable installation was reduced to a field of tumbling wreckage, its garrison of ships either destroyed or scattered. Greg allowed himself a tight smile. Another link in the Pakled's chain of oppression, severed. But there was no time to celebrate. Already Ares was detecting Pakled reinforcements en route, their ships burning hard to avenge their fallen comrades. Greg opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, prepare for hyperspace jump. We've struck our blow. Now let's vanish before they can strike back." As one, the fleet leapt forward, the Vengeance taking point. They raced into the swirling vortex of the hyperspace portal, leaving the stunned Pakled in their wake. This pattern repeated itself across Pakled space. The Vengeance and its motley armada would appear as if from nowhere, striking at the Supremacy's most vital installations. Shipyards, dry docks, resupply stations, none were safe from Greg's lightning raids. Faced with an enemy that could strike anywhere at any time, the Pakled were forced to disperse their fleets, trying to cover every potential target. But this only played into Greg's hands. With the Pakled's forces scattered, they could no longer mount a concerted defense of their outlying systems. One by one, these worlds fell. The Vengeance would drop out of hyperspace, its sensors probing for Pakled military installations. If any were found, they were summarily obliterated from orbit, Greg not wanting to risk the lives of his allies in unnecessary ground combat. With the Pakled presence eliminated, Greg would lead a contingent down to the planet's surface, making contact with the local population. Many of these races had been under the Pakled yoke for so long that the concept of freedom was little more than a half-remembered dream. Greg and his allies would work to change that. They shared technology, helped rebuild infrastructure shattered by the Pakled's exploitative rule. They set up trade routes, fostered cultural exchange, did everything they could to help these worlds stand on their own. And slowly, hope began to kindle. Tales of the vengeance and its crusade spread from system to system, whispered in secret by those who still dared to dream of a life without pack-led masters. On 100 worlds, the seeds of rebellion began to sprout. The pack-led, so used to unquestioning obedience from their subject races, were caught flat-footed by this rising tide of defiance. Rebellions flared like brushfires, the supremacy's forces stretched thin trying to contain them. Distress calls flashed between pack-led worlds, each one pleading for reinforcements that simply didn't exist. And through it all, the vengeance continued its inexorable advance. With every liberated world, Greg's alliance grew, bolstered by the very races the pack-led had once enslaved. What had begun as a quest for vengeance had become something more, a fight for the very soul of the galaxy. Other powers, long cowed by the might of the supremacy, began to stir. Ancient rivalries, subsumed under the weight of pack-led domination, reignited. Alliances shifted and reformed as the galactic status quo crumbled. The pack-led, once the unassailable masters of known space, found themselves beset on all sides. Their subject races were in open revolt, their fleets scattered and depleted, their hold on the galaxy slipping with every passing day. And at the forefront of it all was a single human, driven by a rage that had burned across millennia, and the godlike ship that was the instrument of his wrath. The pack-led had sown the wind, and now, in the form of Greg and the Vengeance, they were reaping the whirlwind. On the bridge of his ship, Greg watched the galaxy map, each liberated system a point of light in the darkness. There was still so much to do, so many worlds still groaning under the pack-led's heel. But for the first time in a long, long time, Greg allowed himself to feel something akin to hope. The pack-led's reign was coming to an end, and from its ashes a new galaxy would rise, one free from the spectre of their tyranny, one where the sacrifices of Earth and her children would never be forgotten. One where humanity, even reduced to a single vengeful soldier, would make its mark on the stars once more. Greg's jaw tightened as he read the intelligence report, his eyes hardening with resolve. The pack-led, in a final act of desperation, were gathering their remaining ships for a surprise attack on Earth. They hoped to shatter humanity's spirit by destroying its homeworld. "Here's," Greg barked. "Gather our allies. We're taking the fight to the pack-led. We can't let them reach Earth." The AI's response was immediate. "Acknowledged, Commander. Sending word now. The fleet will be ready to depart within the hour." Greg nodded, his mind already racing ahead, formulating strategies and contingencies. He wouldn't let the pack-led catch him off guard. Not this time. As promised, within an hour a vast fleet had assembled around the Vengeance. Ships of all shapes and sizes, crewed by dozens of races, united in their hatred of pack-led tyranny. Greg felt a swell of pride as he looked out at them from the Vengeance's bridge. This was what he had been fighting for, a galaxy united against oppression. "Set course for the pack-led staging ground," Greg ordered. "Maximum warp." The fleet leapt forward as one, tearing through the fabric of space-time towards their destiny. Hours later they dropped out of warp at the edge of the system, sensors already probing ahead. The sight that greeted them was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The pack-led fleet was vast, a seemingly endless sea of warships bristling with weapons, dreadnoughts, battleships, carriers. It seemed the pack-led had thrown every last ship they had into this final gambit. For a moment Greg felt a flicker of doubt. His fleet was outgunned and outnumbered. Did they really stand a chance against such overwhelming force? "All ships engage the enemy," Greg commanded, his voice ringing across the comm channels. "Draw them in, keep them focused on us." The Allied fleet surged forward, weapons charging, shields raised. The pack-led ships turned to face them, their own weapons coming to life, glowing with deadly energy. The void between the fleets vanished in an instant, filled with the criss-crossing trails of missiles and energy beams. Ships on both sides shuddered and buckled under the onslaught, hulls shattering, atmosphere igniting. But even as his allies took losses, Greg could see his plan was working. The Pakled were so focused on the ships in front of them that they didn't notice the Vengeance slipping away, engines burning hard as it skirted the edge of the battle. Greg's hands flew over the controls, his eyes locked on the tactical display. He wove the Vengeance through the chaos of the battle with preternatural skill, the ship responding to his every command like an extension of his will. Plasma bolts and fusion missiles streaked past the Vengeance's shields, close enough to rattle the hull. But Greg didn't flinch, his focus absolute. He had a mission, and nothing would stop him from seeing it through. As the Vengeance neared the heart of the Pakled fleet, Greg's finger hovered over the trigger for the ship's secret weapon, a massive EMP generator capable of shutting down an entire fleet. He had to time this perfectly. Too early, and the Pakled would have a chance to regroup and counterattack. Too late, and his own fleet would be caught in the blast. Sweat beaded on Greg's forehead as he watched the distance countdown. 3, 2, 1. Now! Greg roared, slamming his hand down on the trigger. For a moment nothing seemed to happen. Then a shimmering pulse of energy erupted from the Vengeance, expanding outwards in a sphere of crackling blue light. The pulse washed over the Pakled fleet, and suddenly everything went still. Ships that had been in the midst of heated battle hung motionless in the void, their lights flickering and dying as the EMP fried their systems. A cheer went up from the Allied fleet as they saw the Pakled ships go dark. They surged forward, weapons blazing, tearing into the helpless enemy with ruthless efficiency. Greg watched from the Vengeance's bridge as the Pakled fleet was systematically dismantled, a grim smile on his face. In a matter of hours, the once mighty armada had been reduced to a graveyard of shattered hulks, drifting lifelessly in the void. It was over. The Pakled supremacy, which had cast its shadow over the galaxy for millennia, was no more. The news of their defeat spread like wildfire, and the remaining Pakled worlds fell over themselves to surrender, terrified of suffering the same fate as their fleet. In the aftermath of the battle, as the Allied fleet regrouped and tended to their wounds, Greg found himself surrounded by a throng of jubilant aliens. They hailed him as a savior, a hero who had freed them from the yoke of Pakled oppression. They offered him wealth, power, anything he desired, but Greg waved them off. He hadn't done this for glory or personal gain. He had done it for justice, to right the wrongs of the past. But even as he basked in the glow of victory, Greg knew his work was far from over. The Pakled may have been the greatest threat, but they were far from the only ones. Across the galaxy, other races suffered under the boot of tyranny, crying out for a savior. And Greg would answer that call. With the Vengeance at his side, he would hunt down every last despot and dictator, every oppressor and enslaver. He would be the beacon of hope for the downtrodden, the bringer of justice to the unjust. He would not rest until the galaxy was free. With the Pakled supremacy in ruins, Greg and his allies turned their gaze to the other despots that plagued the galaxy. The Vengeance tore through the void, the ships of the liberated races following in its wake, an armada united in purpose and resolve. They struck at the heart of the Zorgon Imperium, a cruel regime that had enslaved entire species for generations. The Vengeance's particle beams lanced through the Imperium's flagship, reducing it to molten slag as the Allied ships engaged the rest of the Zorgon fleet. The battle was fierce but brief. The Zorgon ships, once thought invincible, crumpled under the onslaught, their hulls ruptured and burning. Greg led the charge onto the Zorgon homeworld, his powered armor shrugging off the defenders' fire as he stormed the Imperial Palace. The Zorgon Emperor, a vile creature with a dozen writhing tentacles, cowered behind his elite guards, but they were no match for Greg's fury. He tore through them like a force of nature, until he stood before the Emperor, plasma rifle leveled at the tyrant's head. Greg's finger tightened on the trigger. A part of him, the part that had once been a man, a part of a family, a civilization, urged restraint, but that part was buried deep, smothered under centuries of grief and rage. He fired, and the Emperor's head vanished in a spray of ichor. And so it went on a dozen worlds, against a score of tyrants. The Korgan Dominion, the slaver lords of Xerxes Prime, the blood magocracy of Zul. One by one, they fell before the fury of the Vengeance and its allies. Worlds were liberated, peoples freed from the yoke of oppression. But for every victory, there was a cost. Friends, allies fell in the battles, their lives given in the name of freedom. Worlds, caught in the crossfire, burned, their surfaces scoured clean by the weapons of war. The very fabric of galactic society began to fray, as old power structures crumbled and new ones struggled to take their place. And through it all, Greg remained unchanged, his body preserved by the Vengeance's advanced medical bays, his mind and soul scarred by the unending cycle of war and death. The decades turned to centuries, and still he fought, still he led the charge against the forces of tyranny. So until one day, after a brutal campaign against the Harvesters of Sorrows, a death cult that had slaughtered entire populations for their dark rituals, Greg found himself alone on the Vengeance's bridge. He stared out at the stars, once so full of promise, now cold and distant. In that moment, a terrible realization struck him. He had become the very thing he had sworn to destroy, a being of pure vengeance, living only to mete out punishment against the guilty. In his centuries-long crusade, he had sacrificed everything that made him human, his compassion, his hope, his very soul. Tears streamed down Greg's face as he slumped into the command chair, the weight of ages pressing down on him. He had won countless victories, liberated untold trillions, but at what cost? He had become a monster, as surely as those he fought against. With a trembling hand, he activated the ship's intercom. "Ares," he said, his voice raw with emotion, "set a course for the Tartarus system. Prepare the self-destruct sequence." "Greg?" The AI's voice was tinged with concern. "Are you certain?" "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," Greg replied. "It's time to end this, time to end all of it." As the Vengeance hurtled through hyperspace towards its final destination, Greg recorded a message, a final testament to be broadcast across the galaxy. He spoke of his journey, of the horrors he had witnessed and the price he had paid. He urged the liberated peoples to forge their own destiny, to break the cycle of oppression and vengeance that had consumed him. And as the countdown ticked towards zero, as the Vengeance prepared to immolate itself in the heart of a dying star, Greg closed his eyes, a strange sense of peace washing over him. His mission, his long crusade, was finally over. He had given everything in the name of justice, had sacrificed all that he was. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.